that's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there was an interview with me, and Lit Hub chose this as the background for the piece, and I was like, oh, I'm stealing that. It turns out it was like from Wikimedia, so it was like totally like
Oh, okay,
public domain.
cool.
But I was like, I'm taking it as my background.
I need to find
Okay.
like my go-to cohesive background. I was in a serious like a serious meeting earlier this year, and my provost had footage that she took when she was hiking the Camino in Spain. And so it was
Wow.
very beautiful, but there were like horses on their hind legs in the background, and it was like a very stressful image. And so she was talking about all these serious things, and there are horses like bucking and doing all kind of horse things, and I couldn't really focus because I was more interested in what her horses were doing. And she was like, she's like, do you think I was too harsh in that meeting? And I was like, you did great, Dawn, and your horse did great as well. Yay.
I'm so glad we
So
got that
funny.
background discussion on this recording. So with that, we have already started recording. And hello world, and welcome to Honey Literary's new online exclusive feature, Sticky Fingers. And it is our pleasure today to be speaking to the one and only K-Ming Chang, author of BESTIARY, and overall amazing aspirational writer. So welcome to our hive, K-Ming. It's truly an honor. We're gonna have lots of fun today. Thank you for being with us.
No, thank you. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be here and to be talking to you guys.
We're gonna have a great time. We're gonna have a crazy time. And with that, we also have our editor, Rita Mukherjee, in the room, who's gonna get us started. Rita asks the most brilliant questions all the time. So let's do it.
You know, I paid enough for this damn education that I should be able to do at least that, right?
At least.
Which, like, as I was thinking of things I wanted to talk about today, I was able to revisit one of my favorite things to write about in graduate school that really only my chair, which is probably why she was my chair, loved, that I wrote about. And that thing is butts and butts.
Yes.
And like, I just think there's this lacuna in scholarship wherein like people were like, oh yes, the body, embodiment, embodied feminism. And then nobody really wanted to talk about like, but what are those parts? Like, let's talk about that a little bit. People will be like, like, psychological, like literary, interpretation through psychology, or they'll be like, oh, this is an allegory for whatever because of food, right? Dorothy and I write about food nonstop. So we get the mouth all the time. Not interested in that. So much more interested in butts. And so when I was reading my second read through with BESTIARY, I was thinking a lot about like dirt and refuse. And I was thinking about how we're going through this this kind of, we begin and we're sort of flinging things, we're digging, we're kind of in excavation mode. And so I was curious if you felt like we can have like anal storytelling traditions, we have oral ones, because I feel like we have to recover material that's long since been discarded, or maybe has been digested and we think we understand it. What do you make of that? Do you think we can kind of go the opposite route in storytelling and enter through the exit?
Oh, I love that. Wow. That last line was a poem. That was brilliant. Yes. Entering through the exit. Title, Entering Through the Exit. Yeah, no, I love that. I think, I always felt like mouths and like buttholes alike were kind of these, they're so mutually inclusive. They depend on each other. And I remember I was writing a line, like, I think it was like last week, and joking about how like pooping is like metaphor because we're turning something into something else.
Exactly.
And I'm like, yeah, it's transformation. I think there's something really beautiful about pooping because of its like transformative process.
It's alchemy,
and, like,
honestly.
and like metabolizing something is just I think a really epic process. And it's gross, but also really beautiful. And that was like the line that I had one of the characters say, was like, well, I can turn anything into poop. It's like kind of the opposite of like the turning things into gold.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, I think there is there's such a beauty to the entire process from like top to bottom, mouth to intestines.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it kind of it does feel like akin to the things that we can do with language as well, that are really, I think, transformative and like interconnected processes. Yeah, so I'm like ready for you to write this dissertation.
Yes. I'm like, here we go. Step. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that resonates a lot. And as we're talking about like beauty, vulnerability, right, all these things we kind of aspire to when we're writing, I feel like when you say sphincter, like the word sphincter, people always think you mean the anal sphincter, but the esophagus is a sphincter too, right, by definition. So I'm really interested in how we maybe have things coming out of every hole in this book, and how that kind of inscribes its own like world. Like we're not dealing with a world that's like gold and wishes and dreams. It's like there's shit and dirt and decay. Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, when I was writing about the holes in BESTIARY, it was inspired by the fact that I grew up like really near a landfill. So it always smelled really terrible. And like people would make fun of that. And the city was like, we need to, use hundreds of thousands of dollars to like investigate what the source of this scent is. And I'm like, maybe it's the giant mountain of garbage. Like, whoa. I was like, you needed to spend like $100,000 on that. I can just like look out the window and be like, it's that,
Right.
But like the presence of like those really like, I think, fetid smells, and the fact that the ground felt like something living, that it was metabolizing like a landfill, it metabolizes garbage, or ideally does that, and that kind of like sense of a buildup, and also like the land being this living thing, that like farts and also speaks and all of those things. Like I think it was really important and felt really true to my like experiences and understanding of what the land is capable of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really feel that having spent time in Taiwan, which miss so much, I'm thinking about times, let's see, it was probably 2012. I was in Kaohsiung and I did not want to wear a mask because I'm American and I didn't feel like and so I was riding around doing, errands and stuff all day. And because I had never lived in Asia and I was not used to that kind of air pollution, by the end of the day, I was hacking and coughing like I had emphysema. And people I was with were like, "Are you gonna start masking up again?" I was like, "Okay, yes. Now I understand." Obviously, everyone, this is pre-COVID, not talking about COVID masks. But yes, thinking about how like it's so quintessentially American to be like, what is that smell? We have to investigate and we have to cover it up. In the rest of the world, you don't have that luxury, right? You're not unclear on what is that smell. And so I think especially as we look at like the global south, anywhere on the Asian continent, we we don't really get that luxury of like, well, I'm not sure what that smell is, so I guess I have to go investigate. It's like the smell is everywhere. It's with you. You can't really escape it. I remember constantly having to tell myself again in Kaohsiung, don't drink the water. Don't drink the water. You cannot drink the water. It's not up for debate. And just having to remind myself and check my privilege as an American, like who's used to just like going like this under the sink. If I'm like tired and it's the middle of the night, right? You can't really just excuse yourself from rot and decay and pollution and stuff like that. Yeah, and I definitely appreciate what the story lends us in that regard. Dorothy, did you want to go back and forth?
Yeah, let's do a back and forth. Telepathy. You see that, K-Ming? Telepathy. Now you have it too. So I think about the O, I think about the mouth, and then with mouth, guess what? So this actually isn't even the opposite based on this conversation that we're having. Let's talk about how food and sex make the world go round and round. That's our specialty here. And let's talk about hunger. So as a poet myself, I want to talk a bit about your poetry, but at the same time, fuck genre. I don't believe in genre. I believe in blurring these lines. But I want to go back to one of your poems, Etymology of Butch from Boat Press, which is one of my all-time favorites. And I think about these lines you have, such as part E starts with, my grandfather eats even the bones of things. Or take the line, we waste not, no part of the body eaten unused. So I think a lot about the insatiable, and I think about hunger on the page. And I think the way that poets and writers manifest hunger on the page is by simply taking up more space, or taking up the entire page or pages, or multiply that by infinity. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about hunger and the insatiable in any process of writing in any genre.
Yeah, I love this question so much. I feel like everything I ever write can be basically just summed up as as hunger.
Yeah.
I'm like, the plot is hunger. There's nothing else that happens. But like, I remember I did have a teacher who would always ask, like, when does desire enter the story? And that's when things come alive in it. And whenever something wasn't working, it's because there was an absence of desire. Yeah, on behalf of the character or somewhere in the environment, there was just no desire. And yeah, I love thinking about hunger and consumption and desire, and the ways that those feel kind of ancestral in a lot of ways too, like inherited hunger. And what does it mean for people to have deferred their desires for generations? And to inherit that, it's like this tripling of hunger, or like these multiple hungers. And like thinking about queer desire too, in this very like bodily consumptive way, but not in like that weird like fetishy way where like people want to like eat Asian women, like not that. not like dehumanization through consumption, but like a different I don't know, a hunger that feels like it binds you to your body, and centers you inside your body. And also maybe comes out sometimes as like rage, or or all these other forms, I think, of hunger and desire.
Because I think it's infinite. I think that hunger and desire just make us keep going. I think that inherently that is a poetic and metaphorical concept. Or I hate to bring a white guy into the conversation, but as Robert Haas would say, longing we say because desire is filled with endless distances. I think that is true. Thank you.
Yeah, I really love Dorothy and I were talking about this earlier. I was saying I love the idea of a base impulse like hunger in this world, because if we're operating epistemologically in a world where someone has a tiger tail, is hunger my hunger? Is it your hunger? Is it a hunger that we don't yet know? And I was saying I really love when an author has set up a world wherein you're not sure the extent to which those base constraints can, bring someone down, lift someone up. I really like the idea of subverting a lot of those impulses. And I agree with you that like it's so easy. Well, I was gonna say I could write a dissertation about this, but I did write a dissertation about this.
Amazing.
I get so irritated when people are like, oh, women and food, like bad things, and then are like reduction to an edible object, reduction to a fetish, or whatever. I think that's a very flat, unimaginative way to see consumption and food. And so I get that a lot. And as I sift through scholarship from like people who have used language of food and eating in their work, I get very tired, because a lot of the time someone will be really excited, like, oh, you have to read this. It's about food in blank. And a lot of the time it's a well-meaning scholar going through and being like, look at all the ways that food and eating and consumption is oppressive to women. And I'm not really interested in that. I love viscera, which like you got some viscera K-Ming. You got some viscera going. We're curious if so that's kind of a stale tradition that we see. We're curious if there's any traditions in particular that you find really stale in writing, that you specifically like to push back against.
Oh, This is such an interesting question. I feel like it's so funny. I feel like I accidentally break rules all the time. So, I was always told like you can't have flashbacks
Sure.
and you can't have exposition.
Yes.
And that you can't, have like monologues, or you can't do like, there's this idea that you always have to be progressive, and some, not like progressive, like progress
But in
through
like
something.
a linear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That somehow everything is about moving forward, and that it should feel like you progress through a story, through a poem, etc. And I wasn't as interested in that. Like I think even the book, like I wrote about like how I'm interested in accumulation.
Yes.
So the buildup of images, the buildup of lines, until it feels like, it feels kind of like bursting almost, rather than thinking about like, this event happens, that event happens, then this thing. It's just like I'm like, I just want to like see this image come back again, and that's the story, and then I'm done. And so I think I'm really interested in what accumulation looks like, rather than a progress than progressing. And then another thing is like I really really loved, and this is something that I probably deserved a lot of the critique for when I started doing this a lot, but like I loved effaced narrators. So narrators who are not the main character really, but they're like narrating the story. I mean, I guess The Great Gatsby is kind of like our first introduction into this kind of narrator in high school.
I had to think for a second. I was like, I've purged all the white writers from my brain.
Yeah, I know. That's like the only one I still like. I have to use that as a go-to, because when I talk about effaced narrators, like all of the references I usually use, I'm like, I'm not sure if people have read them, so I always default to The Great Gatsby, but I probably don't need to.
Sure.
Like Red Sorghum by Mo Yen, or something like that, where it's like, where it's like, he starts out and he's like, I'm a boy living here, and let me tell you like what my dad did for like 300 pages. and you're like, wait a second, like you're narrating the story, but you're not the main character. You can do that. And I realized I did that really naturally, and I love doing that. Like I love the character as witness, rather, because it's always like, oh, you always have to have a really active main character, like they do something and we navigate the world through them. And I'm like, I'm really interested in that kid who's like, hey, you know what my grandma did for like 300 pages? Let's just, I'll just tell you everything. She was 9 years old, and this and this and this, and like this obsession with premise. An obsession with what came before. I think also is very kind of anti our American our American way of storytelling, which is like, that we want to kind of be this tabula rasa, blank slate kind of thing, and we don't want to talk about the premise of anything, because we know what it's about.
I wonder, like with Dorothy, do you mind if I ask that other question I had?
No, go ahead. I was just gonna add something really quick. I think that some of the best slice of life animes especially are exactly that structure. And this anime is probably before your time. I feel like so old now, but The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is like a treasure. It is like, it's so good because it's like slice of life, you think, but it's actually like fantasy and sci-fi, and it is just a blending of genres, right? And there's also like robots, excuse me, mecha. There's mecha in it, I think. And there's this infinite summer that happens too. So there's time. Well, everything has time, but it has time. And it's great because the main character, the narrator of that show is Keon, who is a very lazy yet brilliant guy, another trope. But he has all these like really like fantastical characters around him. And like, yes, he is part of the action, but he doesn't actually want to be in the action, which is the main driving force. So your points just made me think of that. Let's write an anime together after
this. Let's do it.
But go ahead, Rita, please add on to your question.
No, I love that. And now I haven't watched that in a long ass time, girl.
So good.
But I missed that. And now I'm also thinking about like, why don't we have slice of life like in the West? Like nobody does slice of life here. I feel like if you gave unlike Netflix, if you gave an American audience a drama and it was slice of life, I feel like Americans would lose their shit. They're like, what do you mean? Like the show didn't open with someone's birth. It didn't end with anyone's death. I don't know what to think. Like I think that's why we love slice of life, because it's not about like I hate this term and this word, and I will not use it, and my students also know not to use it with me, but I hate the Bildungsroman, because why do you get a cookie because you came of age? Guess who else did that? Literally every person who
Yeah.
made to adulthood.
And my thing with the Bildungsroman, which why like I was like, I want to subvert this, is because it's always about leaving home. It's always about like, I have to find myself by fleeing. Like,
Right.
that's the only way to be an individual, is to leave where you came from, or leave your community or whatever. And that's how you become a full person. And I'm like, oh, but I'm really interested in the domestic space. Like, I'm really interested in what it means to come of age by rooting yourself really deeply in like the domestic spheres that
Yes.
feed you, rather than being like, oh, I must, you know, like it, like not that I don't appreciate those stories as well. Like, I think there's many stories that are structured like that I think are also really brilliant and necessary. But I think there's just, yeah, I wanted to see if there's another way of telling that story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you accomplished that really well, because even if daughter had, the very white luxury of being like, I have to go away and find a whole epiphany, it doesn't matter. The tale is there. It's not
Yeah.
escapable. So even if you were to exit, and I think that's such a huge part of the queer experience too, is like, it doesn't really matter where you go, or like how you choose to present or not present. Like, it's with you and it's there, and it's probably going to come up at some point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really love that. That kind of takes me into another kind of like form genre question I was thinking about. What I was thinking about a lot was the space of the myth. And I wanted to ask, like, so I know from, I think your interview with Franny from AAWW, you were saying like you were writing these great big massive poems, and they kind of took on a life of their own. And I find this very mythic, like not just in the diction, but in the teleology and the ontology and the way the characters interact with one another. Like, there are a lot of conventions of the myth there. And so I wanted to ask, what do you think you can accomplish in the space of the myth, rather than maybe our traditional Western linear novel?
Yeah, I love this question, because when I was reading a lot of mythology while writing it, like I came across this recurring theme of like circular time being
Yeah,
very present in non-Western mythological traditions.
absolutely.
Rather than, it's like we'll never go back to that golden age. It's like more like creation, destruction, circular, circular, circular. And I was really fascinated by that, and felt that my life was truer to those circular forms of time than to those linear forms of time. And there's something, yeah, about being in the mythic space that just it made it feel like anything was possible.
Mm-hmm.
That the characters had the capacity to like rearrange the sky, or
Yes.
to make their worlds. And I wanted that really epic power, and like epic knowledge,
Mhm.
to reside within them. I thought it was incredibly fun.
Yeah,
On one hand, I also, I was a huge comic book kid. Huge,
us too.
huge Wonder Woman. I grew up like reading Wonder Woman comics over and over and over again. And my favorite storylines with her were always about her being in her mythological world on
Yes.
Paradise Island, with surrounded by women.
Yes.
And her kind of like mythological origins, and the way that it kind of it was like this homeland that was always with her too.
Yeah.
And I wanted to harness some of that. Yeah, that sense of like there's an origin story or a creation myth that they are actively making on their own terms, and
Yes.
it's like shifting constantly, but they're constantly rewriting it, and it's like revisiting that again and again and again, rather than like we had these origins that were in the past that we can never go back to. It's like
Yeah.
let's remake our origin every just
Yes. I see that recursive tradition. I can definitely see that. It's very interesting.
I love that infinite cycle too, because I think about like the queerness of all of that. And one of my favorite like writers right now and critics is Karen Tongson. And Tongson always talks about this theme of like impossible love, but then also like achieving it. And that's not a new queer theme necessarily, but I think that like us talking about that confrontation of that like impossible love and actually achieving it infinitely is like really like key to a lot of the points that we're talking about today. And so part of that, so let's get into magical realism because we all love magical realism, don't we? And so Gabriel Garcia Marquez once said that everyone has three lives: a public life, a private life, and a secret life. So again, three lives: public, private, secret. K-Ming, will you speak on this as a writer?
Wow, this is this is so brilliant. Wow, my mind is kind of blown thinking about that.
We want to hear
Wow.
everything.
Well, I feel like the writing is kind of a manifestation of that secret life.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's almost like I feel like when I go to the page, it's always because there's something lingering in my mind that there's no way to articulate in
Yeah.
public or private.
Yeah.
It's like I can't talk to my roommate about this, and I also can't like tweet about it, but it's obsessing me, and I can't get it out of my mind, or I don't know where to put it. Like I just don't know where to place this thing. And so it comes out in that secret life that I feel like can't really exist anywhere else. Um, yeah, I think that happens really frequently. Like it'll be like a story I overheard, or like even a place sometimes, or a landscape, and I'm just like I can't just be like, oh, how's your coffee? Hey, by the way, I'm like really into looking at like the Nevada landscape, so here's what I mean. It's also like not publicly acceptable necessarily, especially in professional settings, to kind of slip those obsessions in.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of articulating like that other space that we have to make for ourselves. It's almost like a dream log or something. Yeah, or like a weird saddlebag
Yes.
that
I
we
love
carry with
that.
us. Yeah.
I love that. I love the idea of it being a log, and we just sort of have to, like, for posterity, for ourselves, for whatever reason, we have to kind of be the custodians of that. But otherwise, it's just sort of like, yeah, out there. When did I meet you, Dorothy? When I was 25. Before I was
Yeah.
25 and met Dorothy, and then there's one other person in my life with whom I have this relationship. But other than that, there is no one with whom I can transcend the social mores of like polite conversation to the effect where like sometimes I will just text Dorothy at a very inappropriate hour and
That's me
just
too.
and I'll be like something will just be on my mind. I'll be like, I saw a pizza and it was on a whole wheat crust and I want to call the police. And she's like,
I'll be
why
like,
would they she's like, why did they put it on a whole wheat crust?
together.
Oh.
And we'll have a long, virtually like infinite conversation about why a whole wheat crust pizza is essentially a crime against humanity. And we'll talk about this for a really long time. The same way we'll talk about something very grave in our professional lives, the same way we'll talk about something that we saw on Netflix that we like. It gets that value, but it did take me 25 years to meet a person with whom I could just be like one day I was just sitting and I told Dorothy that Gwyneth Paltrow like made me really, really fucking angry, and everything about her made me angry. And Dorothy was like, well, why don't you write some poems about that? And then I
Yes.
did.
Yes. Oh my God, that's amazing. That's
Oh my
epic.
God.
I love that so much.
Jade egg, or that
Yeah.
time Gwyneth Paltrow was like, "Here's a candle that smells
Didn't
like."
she sell a trash can?
She sold a trash can.
Yes.
I'm an avid Goop reader, not because I like it, because I hate it.
Yeah,
It's
hate
like,
reading. I'm there with you. Hate reading.
like she had a wooden spoon on there that like everybody auntie has in their kitchen. It's just that flat. Like if you are an Asian woman, you have handled this utensil in your life. And Gwyneth Paltrow was like this bespoke, like wooden, whatever. And I was like, girl, what? It was $300 US. Not okay with that. But anyway, going back to the idea of like that private life and having to put that onto the page because there really is like no other space for it. That makes me think a lot about accountability. And right now, I think we're doing two things at once. I think as writers, we're holding one another accountable in new ways, which is really exciting, and I love that. On the other hand, I think that writers of color, queer writers, and I'll count us too, Dorothy, even though like this doesn't really count for us anymore, but I'll say young. Young.
You are young. Oh my goodness.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I feel like when I say that, I just mean like not boomers is what I mean.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like not sorry, not and full offense boomers.
Yeah.
I feel like we are tasked with so much responsibility. We are expected to represent our culture, our authenticity, whatever that looks like, our sexuality, our gendered identity, our hybridity, our home language, forgotten or not, spoken or not. I feel like we get so many tasks that white writers just really don't. So I'm curious, K-Ming, if you feel like we have this kind of responsibility to do this excavation work with writing and with kind of like secrets and myths and stuff like that. First, I want to know if you agree. Do you think we're tasked differently? And if so, what do you think that looks like for you when you're writing? What does that kind of recovery process look like?
It's great that you use the word recovery because I feel like I do have a bit of workshop trauma where where I think that we are tasked with those things oftentimes involuntarily. And for basically the entire time I was first starting to write prose, somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought I was doing something wrong because a lot of the feedback I got were all like, oh, I learned so much about your culture. This interesting cultural, culture as the buzzword, like interesting cultural reference to this, or I learned so much about blank. And I'm like, what? I was like, learned about what? Like, what did you learn about? I was so confused. I was like, wait, what did you learn though? Can you be more specific? I mean, I thought I was doing something wrong. And I was like, oh, am I in some way objectifying my characters? Are they not people? Is this story just like me explaining some historical context, like what's going on? And it was only until I found my writing group and I started writing with them and I listened to what they had to say about my stories. I was like, oh my God, wait, so I have it. It wasn't me. Like you get it. Like the things that you were saying, they were like in my heart as I was writing. And I was like, what? Like this whole time I thought I was just this like terrible writer who was just like educating people on things that I didn't even know I was educating them about. So yeah, I think a lot of it is there's so much external assigning of what your role is or what you're supposed to write about, where people would always default to like, oh, well, it's like about these like parents who are mean and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's not.
Oh my God.
Where did you get that? Like, I remember when I was first even like querying BESTIARY around, I got like comments on how it was like, oh, it's about how, your parents are oppressive and you have to like, find yourself. And I was like, what?
No. Yeah, that's exhausting. And it's so interesting because I liked what you said about kind of like defaulting, because I can't help but notice with going into workshop and looking a certain way, people react to your work a certain way too. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I wrote a poem or I wrote a prose piece about making a drink, and you guys are like, thank you for educating me. I learned so much about your culture.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, you didn't.
I know. I'm like writing about two girls like going to 7-Eleven, and they're like, what a cultural
like your
experience.
culture.
Oh, amazing.
And they're like
what's going on?
I have a new understanding of like what it's like now. Like, huh? Do you? And I noticed that that accompanies our names, right? Like the three of us have names that render our ethnic racial identity, on the page. So we can't escape, like some of the people in our community may have a name that doesn't signify, right, racially or ethnically. And I can't help but notice the way that they move through space and journals is a little bit different than the way maybe one of us would, when that editor, that agent, whomever is seeing, okay, K-Ming Chan, I'm expecting, if I'm calling upon, this writer for this thing, whatever, and then I'm calling upon, Chang for these standards, like that's really the kind of hypocrisy that makes me want to abandon the profession and run just run far, far away. But I hear that, and I think it's really interesting, how much unsolicited feedback we tend to get on our like cultural and racial and queer messages, that we didn't ask for.
And then there's like no notes on our craft, but it's
No.
Exactly
educating.
There are no edits, and I don't know if it's people are afraid that they'll sound racist. Like they're really, really afraid. They're like, oh God, if we say anything, like she's gonna be like, and I'm like, the fact that you're afraid to touch it is racist. Like the fact that you're afraid to say something about it, it would just be like silence. And I'm like, okay.
And I have like, as a professor, I have actually scolded entire classes of students for doing that. I'll be like, hey, everyone, your silence is a massive microaggression right now, and it needs to stop.
Yeah.
Get into it. And that's what we want to prevent, and I have this like brief nightmare MFA story where the first serious manuscript I did was Chinatown Sonnets.
Oh, I remember this.
In undergrad. And this is relevant because unfortunately this happens all the time, Dorothy Chan writing about Hong Kong, where it's going to go. I bring it into workshop during my MFA at Arizona State. A white boy, of course, a white boy in class, his first comment is, I think that these sonnets are too stereotypically Chinese. And it's like, when was the last time you were Chinese?
I know.
When are you Chinese and know a stereotype or not? And it's like these authentic poems about like my grandma in her like pajama stand, or my grandfather like making dinner. And I'm just like, okay then.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, don't you feel like people are always pointing to us for like authenticity in this way that like I don't know, I think I know what white people mean when they say that, but I don't. Like, how could that be a stereotype? It's just like my grandma was eating breakfast, and they're like stereotypical.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'm authentically eating my breakfast.
I'm eating because I'm a human and I need to eat.
Apparently like that's what they think is like running through our minds as we're doing things. I'm like, I'm authentically putting on my socks right now. I'm authentically brushing my hair right now. Like, what's going on? I think it's like I learned what to listen to. And I learned what wasn't really about me, because I thought it was always about me. I thought when I got these comments, it was always some personal failing. And I learned like sometimes the readers bring things to the page that is entirely their own. And you're not capable of controlling that. And I think coming to terms with that has helped me a lot in terms of like thinking about what I'm tasked with, and thinking about like, oh, what does I kind of like now know what to listen to a little bit more. And the people who I listen to are the ones who are like, I think they were the first people to see that there was like love in my writing, because people were really hyper focused on the trauma in it. And I'm not saying there isn't trauma, because I do write about trauma. It's just like that was so hyper visible to them that it was always, and it's easy for them to kind of latch onto that and be like, oh, traumatized, trauma. And I was like, yes, but there's so much love that I'm also trying to write about. Absolutely. And it was the people who were attuned to that who I tried to listen to, because I'm like, oh, you understand that I'm not just like trying to write this like very objectifying, purely traumatic thing.
Absolutely. And I think, and like I think you'd have to be a very naive writer or reader to read Bestiary and see trauma, pain. Like the tenderness in this book is so earnest. And maybe because of choices that you've made with your pacing, choices you've made with divisions and sections, I think we really get moments to digest. Not sorry for that pun because it's
no, I love it.
I think it's the funniest all
love
the
it.
time, you know.
I love it, and I think that that is something. So so now Dorothy and I, you know, we grew up, I guess, and we have our big girl jobs to pay the bills. So we're teaching, right, constantly. And when I'm reading things that I think I might teach, I get very, very protective and very defensive because my students need to read the thing the way that I'm reading it and understand the properties I'm understanding. And if they I get very, very angry. So like when the first time I taught Woman Warrior, I went through with my Florida State University students, and I was like, okay, here's some things we're not going to talk about when we talk about this book. So I was like, let's brainstorm all the racist things that we could say, and we're going to get it out of our system. So I was like, let's not make statements like, in Asian culture. What the hell is that? So we go through and we do that. And so I feel very protective of this book, and I feel very aggressive about misreading and misnaming. But I think part of that is because your narrator and you, by extension, are not afraid to step in and be a little bit prescriptive and kind of turn your reader a bit. I think my favorite instance in this book is on page 138. I can't stop thinking about this. So we're in pirate section, right? And just this part. To be read in Amma's voice, suggestions read this aloud underwater or speak perpendicular to a strong wind or swallow a fork before speaking. Bleed your voice of its language, then learn a sea's accent. Like that kind, I'm so taken with that didactic moment because we often teach reading as if it's something that you kind of like go into an osmosis state, and then you're like, now I am reading. Wash it over you.
Stage directions, don't pull back the curtains. I'm suspending my disbelief.
Yes. And in moments in the Western canon, when someone breaks the fourth wall, everyone's like, oh my God.
They're like, is this postmodernism?
Like, they acknowledge this was a book. It's meta. I love it. And I'm like, really? But what I love about your book is that you're not afraid to be like, this is how you need to render this portion. Hi, reader, you, hello. If you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. Think about what this means before you proceed, and don't fuck it up. I love that that kind of like, I'm picturing the allegory I'm using is kind of like a hand on a head. So you can turn it. There's only so many ways you can turn it, but that narrative control is really there. And I love I'm going to call it gall. I love the gall of stepping in and saying, this is exactly how you need to read this portion. The accent of the sea, like I'm thinking about my Iowan students who, like many of whom have never seen the ocean before. And I'm thinking about how much I need them to internalize that and understand, what does it mean to sound, right? Like the sea. So with that extremely long comment in mind, I'm curious, with moves like that, did you feel like you wanted to make that active decision and have your narrative voice move that way?
Yes, I actually I wrote it exactly like that, and I loved it because I wanted to write. I didn't know I wanted to write this, but I wanted to write a story about storytelling, which again is that meta thing. But I was just really fascinated about how storytelling is both like the vehicle of the story, but also the main conflict of the story, which is basically like, who do I believe, my grandma or my mom? Like, they're both telling me different stories about themselves. Who am I supposed to love? Like, whose side am I supposed to be on? And also, like, it's about storytelling and the ways that it's like transmitted all of these kind of slanted histories, these histories told slant, and these traumas, and how the stories themselves are like the footprints of these experiences. And so I was like, okay, it needs to be very obviously a story about stories, because that's what I'm interested in at the core of it. It's about narrative and what it means to tell a narrative, and for it to be fractured, or for it to be kind of told secondhand, or what it means to have faith in a narrative. But I also, there were moments when I was like, oh, maybe I should just delete all those portions. And so I remember I deleted that. And then there was like a portion where the mother, which is still in the book, luckily, where she like lectures to the daughter about light versus dark. And the binary. And I was like, oh, this sounds like it should go in like an essay or some kind of linguistic magazine. Like maybe it's too didactic. But then I realized that like I love didactic things.
Too.
Very like, I grew up around people who just love to give lectures like all the time and love to tell you what to think. Like it was like I just grew up around everyone who was just like, you know what, like you should, like it just like
I love it.
all the time, like put on your socks, like don't do this, like, and I was like, it's so weird that like there's this taboo in literature of like you can't be prescriptive, because I'm like, I don't know who you all know in your lives, but I'm like surrounded by prescriptive language, and we're surrounded by that constantly. So people are like, oh, it's not realistic to be so prescriptive. I'm like, actually, it's like more realistic to be prescriptive probably than not, like given what we consume in our daily lives and what we encounter. So it felt right for me, for like the mother to be like, okay, pause. Lecture time. Or for the granddaughter who's like recounting the story to be like, hey, by the way, like I want to preface this with a preface, and then another preface, and then another little thing in it. Like it felt truer to life in some ways to be able to do these things that are quote unquote artificial. When I'm like, but we live with artifice. It's like back to that weird authenticity thing. I'm like, we live with with constant like artifice. And I wish that we could, you know, render that and not have it seem like, well, it's not like, you know, people are, you know, like this, blah. And like, I remember like the dialogue too, I was purposefully making it like really like grand, almost godly dialogue, which I love doing. Like Ben's dialogue, sometimes I'm like, what is she saying? I love it. Because I kind of thought of her as a bit of like a trickster god, that she's both this person and kind of supernatural. And the way that they spoke was like, it was almost in like verse poetry, like it was almost in poetry, the way that the dialogue was rendered. And I know that there's such a, like, again, it's like that taboo, like, oh, it's not realistic. And I'm like, well, that depends on your definition of reality. Like the realism that's rendered in the books that we are told is realism, I don't recognize. I'm like, what is this fantasy world that I don't know?
Are you kidding me? When I was growing up and they made me read, what's that goddamn book, Hatchet, I was like,
oh my God.
I was like, you're telling me there's a little white boy outside in the snow and nobody's gonna get him? No, sorry, that's not the world I live in. And everybody went ape shit, you know, all the kids like loved it. And I was just thinking about how
so funny,
unrealistic that was, and how much, like now I'm 31, I probably read that book in like, I don't know, first grade or something, and I'm haunted so many years later by that book, because everyone was like, this is the paradigm of children's literature, and I was like, this is shit. What are you talking about? Like, adults in my life don't talk like that. You're right. I mean, like, I think especially if you grew up as an Asian or Pacific Islander subject, you're just used to a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions, and they're going to let you know they're not interested if like, oh, do you want to hear my thoughts on? No, that's not how people talk in our world.
And I never heard anyone be like, oh, life is so ambiguous. And sometimes, you know, it's always just like, this is like this, you know, and and I enjoy like rendering that for sure.
Yeah. I think that's particularly important for like a queer poetics of writing or queer craft of writing. I think like making sure that we're both naming, like, I'm going to be didactic as hell right now, and I'm not sorry, and then executing it such that it can be like, I could teach, you know, let's look at the use of didactic prose or the use of instruction in bestiary. And that could be, ISU, if you want to throw me some coins, that could be its own seminar coming to you spring 2021. But
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that consistency is appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I just needed to constantly remind the reader that this was constructed. Like back to that whole artifice thing, I needed to constantly remind them that this is something being built and that narratives aren't like natural in some way. Like there are, I mean, they are natural, like they're coming from the body, from the ground, but they're also being really intentionally moved or skewed in this way. And I think that's one of the things that I was probably a flaw of this country too, is like pretending things like certain narratives are natural and certain narratives are just like truth. And I'm like, but it's all built, it's all constructed, and myths are they're invented. And so it was like trying to nudge the reader constantly, like, oh, but also, by the way, this is all made up. And because of very specific, everyone has this different agenda, and they're making things up. So just letting you know. Yeah.
I'm like really afraid of the terms natural, realistic, relatable, universal.
No, that's a bad word. I hate relatable.
There's more synonyms to that, but like I feel like those 4 words. I'm sorry to bring up a bad memory. You just made me think of Hatchet, and I'm like, oh my god, you provoked my bad childhood memories. But
my class was going to read it, but we ended up not. But I remember the cover like very specifically, so I know like the very kind of basic outline of it, but I never had to go through it.
Girl, don't. It's a piece of shit. You know what's a good book? Holes. Okay?
That's a great book. I love it because you can't ever have half a hole. I love it.
And you know what I love about Holes?
What?
It's about family. It's about digging in the dirt. It's about it's about undergirding power structures that maybe you're not cognizant of. So I mean, maybe everyone should probably just read Louis Sekar and K-Ming Chang in tandem. I don't know. It's a radical idea.
Holes and holes.
Hey!
I subtitle and I just say like a holes like side quote.
I love
a holes companion novel. Going on the paperback now.
Oh god, okay, that's our next magazine, A Prairie Hole Companion.
A Prairie Hole Companion.
Yeah. That'll be our lesbian erotic journal.
We should do that.
Yes.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yes.
So so we have an anime we're doing now.
Yes,
Slice of Life,
a slice of life, and we have our Prairie Hole Companion.
And we're doing a cookbook. I just decided to throw it. We're doing a wallpapers, because we were looking at wallpapers the other day. No, we were looking at fancy paper, but
because we want to run a chapbook contest in the spring.
Yes.
And so
we're looking at Hollander's paper, which is really fancy.
My friend is a printmaker by trade, so he has a very different understanding of publishing and the materiality of it than like we do. We're like I don't know, you send it to Penguin and you get a book back. So he was showing us like the paper and different materials that we can use, and I was like, well, we'll keep it low cost, so just pick something plain. And then Dorothy showed me the actual website where the paper is sold, and it's like just think of any pattern you could want. There's like a sushi one that I really want. There were ones with birds, like your background, and there was like so many beautiful, elaborate papers. And then I was like, okay, never mind what I said about keeping the cost low.
That's amazing. It would be hilarious if you guys were just like, for the chapbook contest, like, we're gonna determine your paper. Contract says that like we choose your paper, sushi paper maybe. Bird paper, sorry.
Quickly, because a lot of the papers on that website are sold out, and so like we already, because it's just so beautiful. But yeah, like the one of the baguettes, I never knew I needed
one.
And then I'm like,
baguette paper? Who did this?
Baguettes on it at Hollander's, which is
that was cute. I like that one, and I saw one that was plain, and I thought it was just plain, and then at the bottom there was a single snail, and I was like, her, it's her. So
Oh my
cute.
God, that's so cute.
I like lost my mind because I was like, this is plain. What is this? And I clicked on it, and then there was just this like audacious snail. And she was like, yes.
Oh my God, wow, time to like self-publish a snail story on this
Right.
paper.
Yes.
Gotta make this happen.
Snail story from you any day or any.
Oh yeah, true. I would be really excited to read a snail story.
Yeah.
It
So
would probably get eaten. It would probably, that's probably what would happen.
So guess what, K-Ming? So you are our Valentine. I know it's not like Valentine's Day yet, but you're our Valentine. Oh yeah, I knew to do it. Okay. Because also Valentine's is one of Honey Literary's special sections that we've come up with, and it's really exciting because our debut issue is also premiering around Valentine's Day. And so
Ooh.
here's our next question for you. Speaking of Valentines, if you could send a Valentine to any writer, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
Oh, this is so good. Whoa. Okay. It can only be one person, or can I do like?
No, I love all kinds of love, you know.
Okay, I'll send multiple. So I'll send one to Marilyn Chin for Revenge of the Mooncake Vixen.
Oh yeah.
Because that book changed my life, which is like so cliche to say, but I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever read in my life. I'm laughing, I'm crying. This is amazing. Like you can retell like all these Buddhist myths, and I'm just like, yes.
Yeah.
So Marilyn Chin, I have to send her my heart.
She has a great cover too. I like that cover.
It's amazing with like the flipped heads.
Yes.
So great. Love it. And then I will send a Valentine to Chiu Miao Jing, who's the Taiwanese writer who's deceased, but I would send one to her ghost. I translated one of her stories for one of my classes once.
That's awesome.
And I would probably like attached to the Valentine would be like, did I translate this right? It would be like a query to her ghost of like, is this okay? Yeah, so I would send one to her. I would burn it for her. Oh man, I want to send one to like everyone in my writing group too. Like I think that they are just like my most beloved readers in every way, and I love reading their work as well. Like it just it's a really beautiful little community. Yeah, so those would be my my Valentine.
That makes me so happy. That makes me feel very, very like pleased and fulfilled. And you know, Dorothy, even as we like start to get ready to send out the first issue, like I just can't stress enough how much, if people don't have their writing group, be on the hunt for your writing group, because like I'm sure K-Ming, I can speak for both of us, when it's like it's day and night once you have your group and you're like, I have my safe people that are my readers and I trust them and they trust me, and it's like all love, like it, like what it can do for your craft. I feel like it was a big relief, but it took me a long time to find my like core people. And I'm glad that you have that core and that group, because I just think that like especially after this very beautiful and lovely year that we just had, the value of our communities that we are, you know, our found families and stuff, it cannot be stressed enough.
Yeah.
We must have those for survival.
I'm really glad you found your group. You also found your group way earlier than I did. So I'm
Me too.
I'm really happy for you, because I think that it's really, I think that like before I met Rita and our honey hive, I think that it was also just like, it's just really hard because you think about how white all these MFA programs are. You think about how white all these PhD programs are. You think about how, you know, like almost every form of education you get in English literature and creative writing, regardless of the genres you're focusing on or the time periods, are extremely canonical. You think about how it's okay to say a term such as universal or relatable as like justification for liking something. And I'm just really happy that you found your group really early on, because that's a very special bond.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's been like the most transformative thing in my in my writing life so far.
I love that. Yeah, and I feel like we need to start singing those songs louder, because You know,
Yeah.
there's this like really romantic idea that, you know, you're just like in your apartment drinking coffee and like writing your novel all day and night. And it's this very solitary kind of self flagellating practice, and you should really suffer. And I want more, especially with like our students and emergent writers who are just now getting the confidence to send out. I want them to understand like you can be a pack animal. You can have your like group and commiserate, and that's where you go to like vent and celebrate and everything like that. Because it's not, it doesn't need to be this weird, solitary, secret, shameful practice. Yeah, like there's a lot of times that sometimes I'll write a poem and I'll be like, does this work? And I'll send it to Dorothy and I'll be like, what do you think about this? I can't stop writing about like my like childhood love who like I'm not in touch with and haven't spoken to in like 50 years. Like, should I send this out? And she's like, yes. She's like, you
Yeah.
have to write that poem.
Yeah. It's also really amazing to have writing be a writing space that's like away from capitalism and from like production and publication and things like that. Like it was almost like healing to be having fun again in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, like as much as we're jazzed, you know, that you're making waves, and I mean, I needed Bestiary as like a young person. Like I needed that when I was like 12. But
Thank you.
I'm so happy it's there now. And of course, you know, we're thrilled and we're jazzed that you're what, 22 and out here and doing the thing. At the same time, like you're allowed to have livelihood. You're allowed to be like, this is my joy, this is my thing that I do. And like now I feel like it's a race for all of the younger writers to place that first book, like go, place
Yeah.
the book, do the things. And as much as like that is thrilling and I love it, on the other hand, I'm like, but it's also okay to like love your writing process and get your wits and your kind of senses about you before you embark out onto the thing. And
Yes.
it frightens me a little bit because as we see some of our students starting their graduate work, I'm always like, make good choices. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
watching them go off, because it's hard to still have that joy and that
Yes.
fulfillment and that fun when it's like your day job. And so like I think that's something we really admire about you and that we really love, is that it's just as much about the joy and the art and the craft of it as it is about the, you know, success, whatever people want to call it, the clout, as the youth say.
I'm also just like really happy that we're talking so much about craft, and particularly your craft, K-Ming, because something else that like really alarms me about some people who are like in the writing world or want to be in the writing world is like they'll ask questions such as, you know, like how does it feel to write a poem or story? And then they have this like huge emphasis on that feeling, but they're looking for some kind of like life altering, profound answer for every single line you
Right.
read. And I just love how you're just real with it. You're just real that, you know, like I love this. This is a process and done. There is, of course, it's profound. Like, of course, anything you write is profound. But I think that a lot of these so-called very dangerous mindsets a lot of writers have nowadays, where they're placing like publication before their craft. They're placing publication before honing their craft or reading enough or even writing enough or meeting the right people, or they're placing publication and that kind of they're looking for this so-called sublime feeling for every single moment of writing that doesn't exist. Because, you know, like I know that like all us writers, like we might be students, we might be teachers, we might have other day jobs, but like we all simply put, successful writers, we just sit down and we write. And after a certain amount of time, maybe a few hours, we're like, I'm done for the day, I'm not going to look at it, or maybe we keep going. But at the end of the day, it's just about the writing. And I know that sounds really bland, but I think that actually we do have to like emphasize that more, especially to young people and
Yeah.
to emergent writers who want to like enter the world. If you can actually just sit there and just do it and then take the critique and then find the right feedback, then it's for you. But if you're looking for some kind of sublime orgasmic experience at every inch of what you're doing, like that's not for you, no. And
I wish. We all wish.
we all wish that like every
Yeah.
time you write a line you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna come, but no, that's not gonna like, you know, it's It might, but you just have to go through the process of it all.
Yeah. I love that. I think that if we can change the narrative so it's not
Yeah.
so much about chasing that sublime orgasmic, like, I mean, it's so obnoxious when people are just like, when you read someone's, I'm saying poems because we are all, I guess, like poets a little bit or a lot. um it's so annoying when you read someone's trajectory and you're like, why are you having an epiphany every single poem that you write? How do you have so many epiphanies in you? Because if you think about an epiphany, it's like you might have an epiphany like once in a lifetime or once in a decade, but you
Yeah.
certainly don't have one every time you put, your hands on your computer. So I agree with you. I think we should reframe that a little bit and have more talks about dirt and buttholes and tigers. Less, this lofty meta. I'm gonna talk about meta from now on. I'm gonna pretend I'm in a cloud.
Whoa.
Like, it's funny
No,
because
thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I had a writing professor named Ratu Laptran-Sap, and he would always say like the way to like quell anxiety about writing is to just write.
yes,
And I was like, that's so simple, but that's completely
so good.
it's like the
true.
page will always, and he would always say that the page will always be there for you.
Yeah.
And that like there's so little you can control, but it's just like just do the thing, and all of those anxieties you have about it will be gone in that moment. Just
So
do the
true.
thing. Yeah.
I just love that because it's like what I tell my students. I'm like, you got to just go on your laptop, go in your notebook, just write me just a prose block. Like, I don't care if that's not the assignment. Just dump all the ideas in first. And I think that like also, not to like go too off on too much of a tangent, but I just think that there's not enough emphasis on like revision and
Mhm.
revisiting the piece because again, earlier on in this talk, K-Ming, you were talking about how a lot of people were like, some people went before BESTIARY came out were labeling your book as like, oh, finding oneself. We're talking about all these like very like cliched, like westernized ways of like
Yeah.
looking at things, and I think that so many people who want to be artists and writers, they want to approach the page by like, oh, I can find myself at every moment. I
Mm.
can find myself. And it's also like, no, but again, it's not about that epiphany at every single line. That's impossible. It's really about going into the field and doing the work. And in our case, going into the field is just opening up Microsoft Word, but that's the true reality we live in. It has to be done. It just has to be done.
Yeah, and funny thing about that whole find your voice cliche thing, like I believed in that so much, like
Yes.
as a teen especially. I thought I was like, oh my God, I have to find my voice. I have to, and write like this, like I don't know, where it's like with Jack Kerouac or something, where like everything you write has to sound like it's coming from the same person and all these things. And that was another thing my professor told me. He was like, it's not that you have to like find your voice. You have many, many, many voices, and every single time you start something new, it's just another one of your voices. You can have many. You don't have to quote unquote find it. It's already there. It's just like you have a voice when you're writing an essay. Like you have a voice when you're writing a tweet. You have a voice when you're texting your mom. Like you just
Exactly.
have all of these voices, and you just use them how you want to. And like it's not about finding this one singular thing. I was like, oh, you're right. Like we already all of us just have like dozens and dozens and hundreds of voices.
Totally.
Yeah, and I kind of was able to let go of that a bit more. But yeah, no, I definitely feel what you're saying.
I love that
Go.
because it's also the argument where every poem is arguably a persona poem because we all
Yes.
contain all those like multitudes. And I also think back to an earlier point you were talking about, K-Ming, about truth, and like how multiple workshop participants or multiple writers in a setting may have different definitions of truth. And I think back to she's on our website. One of my favorite writers, Lyra Van Cleef Stefan, and my mentor from Cornell, always says, in writing, we try to find truth with a capital T. But of course, that capital T varies depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious how many times K-Ming, as you were a child and then like starting to write and experimenting more with art and craft, I wonder how many times the voice was there but an ear that couldn't hear you or couldn't listen was the ear that you were presented with. Like that seems to me 9 times out of 10 when people are like, oh, like I don't really know where I'm at with like this writing, or I'm not really sure about my style or my voice or what my signature is going to be. I feel like most of the time all that says to me is, so have your teachers been predominantly white? Maybe male, maybe middle class,
Yeah.
maybe able-bodied, maybe straight. That's usually what I hear, not so much that you didn't have, the voice or a voice, but that I think the listeners weren't ready or weren't trained to find that. Yeah.
Well, it's really funny because I think it was like really self-imposed in that, like when I took my first ever writing class, I was like 18. I was like, oh my God, I've never taken a writing class before. Woohoo. And I was like, okay, so there's literature and then there's like my life. And I thought those two were very, very separate things. I was like, okay, I have to write like a beat poet. I have to like write like a Allen Ginsberg. And I'm like, da da da.
Yeah.
And then and then I was like, oh, and then there's my life, which is like, I'm calling my mom about this. I'm talking to my friend about this. I'm like trying to figure out where to buy a bitter melon, like all these things. And I was like, that's life.
Yeah.
And that's me. And that can't be in literature.
Sure.
That's not my writing. My writing is going to be about all of these like experiences that I've seen romanticized in in things that I've read and thought was like, oh, this is literature. And I had to slowly kind of realize that my definition of what I thought literature or my writing was just like always going to be unattainable. And in some ways I was self-sabotaging because I was constantly reaching for something that I knew was not really mine, but I thought that I had to.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, I need to stop this like weird cycle of self-sabotage where I'm like, I can never be a writer because I'm not a writer. Like it just, and all of these things. And I started to realize that like what felt so resonant for me was like, okay, now I'm writing about the things that I like genuinely care about and the people that like bring me to tears.
Yes.
And suddenly I'm not in this like weird, in that weird zone of like knowing that I can never be something. Instead I felt, it was just like a completely transformative thing. And like that was when I started bringing out those pieces, but I kept thinking I was like doing them wrong because there were people would always comment on culture or they like wouldn't have any craft comments. And I was like, oh, so maybe I'm like messing it up. But I had to basically like extract myself a little bit from that space.
Yeah.
And realize that it's like, I can be grateful for everyone's comments and grateful that people are reading this, but I also, there's like some part of me that needs to withdraw and like that needs to just protect something and not put it all on the table.
Sure.
There's like some part of me that needs to find something that is away from this space.
Yeah.
And that was like really important for me. So I like read on my own a lot and just like found my own like little canon of things that I really, really loved. And I was not fully 100% super like my whole body and soul invested into like, oh, this one person's comments about this and that.
Yeah, especially when I think in workshop in particular, sometimes there are unspoken or nonverbal clues and cues that like someone is winning and someone is not winning. And it's hard when I feel like maybe that person who's looked at as like very strong or very successful or very advanced, maybe when they're giving feedback that's not resonating and you're kind of like, but I know you're good at what you do. This isn't working for me at all, but you're good. So what gives? Like, I feel like learning to decode that is such a process. And I agree with that notion of kind of the sacred. Like there's something it's not for you, and I'm not going to find what I need from you. So I'm going to keep this to myself. And I think that process of kind of like self exploration, like you were saying, going off and reading on your own and exploring on your own is really crucial. And I'm just really stoked that you arrived there and graced us with this novel. I think it's fire, and we're just so excited for you and whatever you have up your sleeve for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that means a lot to me. It makes me so happy, and I'm so excited about Honey Literary. Like I remember Dorothy, when you like dropped the tweet about it, and I was like, but I don't think I had a name yet. Like when the first tweet came out about like it was just a magazine,
and I like did it out of a reaction, and I was like, man, I'm like, guess what? We're doing this. And
I know, I saw it and I was so excited. I was like, bookmark.
Thank you. That means so much because like I just like dropped the tweet and I didn't think people were gonna listen, but then I like looked down at my phone and like within a minute, like there's like 20 likes at least. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be over in like, and then it like kept going and it kept going.
It's so exciting. And because it's like another thing is like I hated looking at mastheads of literary magazines, seeing how white they were, and then it's like I couldn't submit to them. I was like, I have something, but you're gonna like read it and not. You're gonna be like, oh, this is like terrible and horrible. I was just like, I can't. It made me so uncomfortable.
Everything you just said is
that masthead.
Yeah,
because I'm like, I was like, I'm writing something for the community, and like I don't want you to read it, but I want you. I need to submit it, but I can't submit to you. So it was just like, it made me so excited, and I was like, yes, this is what the people need and want.
I'm so glad that like I'm so glad you felt heralded, because like, well, we were heralding you, but but in general, like I can't tell you. So okay, let's see, where am I? I'm at Pink, I'm at Split Lip, and Honey, right? Yeah. So at Split Lip, maybe once in a blue moon we'll get like a high school senior or something. And when we get that high school senior, everybody goes ballistic. All the editors love it. They're so excited. Yes, up and coming young writer, let's do the thing. And I always say, why do y'all think that we don't get more of these emergent writers? Why do you think they're not sending? It's because there's so much gatekeeping. These mastheads are all like, that, PhD, this, MFA, that, whatever. Like, it really agitates me that so many magazines, even ones that might be very supportive of and very conducive to emergent writers putting work out there, so many of them just like are not sending out the vibe or the call that like, you are being hailed, come with us, this is a space for you. And I was floored. I was so excited how many like under 18 writers I got in my poetry inbox for Honey. Like that gets me really jazzed, because I really want people to stop with too young or so young. Like, compared to what? What is the point? What are you saying? Oh, you don't have enough degrees? Fuck that. Oh, you don't have enough publications? Fuck that as well. Like, we have so little interest in all of those mechanisms, and I'm like, you know what, let me get like 5 or 6 15-year-olds in this issue. Like, if it's good work, it's good work, and I want more yous and baby K-Mings. I want them to hear the call, and I want them to feel emboldened to send out, like, you're good enough right now, you're ready right now, you don't need, I don't know, blah 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 quarterly review to tell you you're solid or you're worth something. Like, again, going back to like those shitty capitalist models of like our success.
And a review is my question. Why are they both? Like, is one
I was like trying to think of making up a journal name, but also without like saying like by accidentally saying a place that I hate and then being like, oh no, that was so awkward. Like,
no, quarterly in a review. We're literary. I think that's good. I'm satisfied. You're satisfied. I think K-Ming is satisfied, so we're good. Like,
we're pretty much ready. We are here to assist with your global takeover. So, you know.
No, we're really here for this. Like, oh my God, again, the day we got invasive species, you have like no idea. It was like,
oh, that's so exciting.
We were all like texting, and I was like, it's a party.
That you like submitted to us. Like, it's just like the best feeling as an editor to like see a name that you admire.
Yeah.
Like,
thank you. That was one I was saving to submit to you all, because I've been working on it. I saw all about Honey Literary and the call for submissions, and I was like, I really did not want to submit this to like like an all-white mass, and I was like, I really cannot, like, I can't imagine anywhere else and any other group of people I would be honored to have reading this. So I stayed, I was like, this one.
And no,
I planned it.
honored that, and we're so happy that we got to talk with you today, and we're just really happy that you're our first Sticky Fingers feature.
Oh my God, so excited.
Like,
so excited.
We just like created it because of you. We're like, we have to just have a whole feature on K-Ming Chang. That's what we got to do. We got to have.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah. So in like the future, and as we expand and stuff, everyone needs to recognize that Sticky Fingers came into being because of you and because of this book. So
we will put
that. Oh my God!
Too.
Yeah. Wow. I can't tell you how honored I am. That makes me so happy. Thank you so much. I'm so excited about the issue, like so excited. And yeah, I'm just blown away by your generosity.
No, we're so honored. The honor is all ours. And like, again, just to echo Dorothy, like, thank you so much for being like flexible and open. We know this year has been just hell for all of us. So we're just like really stoked, and this was such an organic, fun chat, like the three of us.
It was lovely. Thank you. Your questions were mind-blowing. Both of you. Amazing questions and insight. I'm like, gotta take notes.
In like future stuff, don't hesitate to hit us up if you need anything promo. I love to fight, so if anyone ever is not very nice to you, just you know where to find me. That's poetry at Honey Literary. Be like, listen, Rita, there's somebody on Twitter.
Like, please call on me. I'm always ready too. I'm there.
Yeah, no, I'm always ready to fight. Dorothy had to like help me because I didn't have Twitter until like this year, because I'm very badly behaved on social media, so I held off. But she was like, "It's time." She's like, "You'll be okay."
It's time, Rita. It was like that. It's like that moment in the movie, where I don't know where we're going, but I'm like, I take Rita somewhere. I'm like, guess what?
Like, it's time. You're like, you need to have.
You give a literal bird that's like the Twitter bird. Like, here,
it's time for you to
your bird.
Yeah,
still on your hands. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But thank you again. We're so excited, and we'll send you stuff as because we'll have like proofs.
Yeah, we'll have the proofs, and then we'll also like have this video itself, and we're also going to be posting a transcript on Sticky Fingers, so it'll be up in a few days. So we'll be in touch very soon. So
thank you. Take it easy, okay?
Yeah, you too. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.